part. And the more difficult part is doing something with those picks and really getting it right. So encouraging the Josh Giddy pick, certainly, which is the first step in that, right?
Yep.
So now you have Giddy and Shea as like real long-term building blocks. And then, beyond that, they have all these picks. And the interesting part is at some point, do they put a couple of those picks in play to try to accelerate the timeline a little more quickly? On this rebuild, if a good young player became available, cough Ben Simmons, cough, for example.
What do you think about the Ben Simmons to Oklahoma City?
It's interesting because they are so far below this year's cap that they could do some stuff that other teams can't do in terms of accommodating Philadelphia or in terms of maybe not sending as much back as other teams would have to. So it gets pretty interesting that way. I actually wonder if they could do something like that at the draft once they know what number their pick is.
Yeah.
If Simmons is still there, I think that's probably more likely than something happening during the course of the season. To be honest, I think they'll probably use this trade deadline to just pick up draft picks. But the weird thing is, like, they could still be well under the cap on draft day.
Yeah.
So that they could take Simmons into cap space, and then their cap number goes up because Shea's max extension hits, after July 1st. But they could do something on draft night with cap space, which very rarely is the case, because usually by the end of the season, everyone has used up all their cap space and then some.
Yeah. So what would the trade even look like in your mind?
Like OKC's draft pick and some of the other draft picks they have, basically for Simmons. And there might have to be, depending on what OKC does, in these next 2 weeks to add salary, there probably has to be some, like Derek Favors or something. There probably has to be some outgoing salary, but it doesn't have to be anywhere near a match, because they could still be like 20 million under the cap or something in June. Yeah. So now obviously that would be a little expensive for them because they'd have to, they still would have used that cap space basically because they have to pay the players the difference.
Yeah.
But, if they're not there at the end of the season, but if they're not the cap floor, at the end of the season, which is lower than the cap number. We're getting into some real arcana here, but anyway, I think it's an interesting thing to watch out for if Simmons does not get traded.
Yeah, I'd be a little shocked if they did that. They still seem to want to build slowly, but eventually they are going to use these picks to acquire somebody. Like that's going to happen. They have too many of them to not do that eventually.
They literally can't use all the picks. And we've seen, like, it's a situation Boston got into where they accumulated all these draft picks and a lot of them weren't really great picks as it turned out. And so they kept just using the picks and the roster got so crowded. It was like they couldn't sign anybody because they just had all these, randoms that they had picked who weren't really good player. I mean, it helps if you hit on the picks too, obviously, but, I think we're seeing that situation a little in Memphis now where they really have to make some hard choices because they've accumulated so many good young players in such a short time period. So I think we already saw that with OKC last year. I mean, the reason you trade 36 and 34 for 32 and just say, what the hell, is because you have so many other picks that it just doesn't hurt you to trade up. We saw them trade up for Poku. I think we saw them trade up. Was Giddy a trade up? I'm trying to remember.
He was not a trade up, but they did trade. Well, they actually traded 16 for 2 more picks. So.
Oh yeah, that's true. Yeah, I would have liked to see them take Şengün there, but at any rate, I think we're going to see them trade up basically in every single draft from here through 28.
Yeah. So let's just take a look at the current roster. You obviously have like your 3 guys that are NBA guys, and Shea and Giddy and Dort. And then you kind of have this mix of guys like Trey Mann and Poku and Baisley and Robinson Earl and Wiggins. Give me like a rough like ranking, or at least tell me of any of these guys, like who do you like the most?
All right. Well, to win a game right now, the best player is Mike Muscala, who weirdly they like hardly ever play, right?
Yeah.
Like he's shooting the ball really well, and I don't know what's going to happen with him. I mean, like he's
He's gonna stay.
30, he's on the last year of his deal.
Yeah.
What if he like got a buyout to rejoin Mike Budenholzer and win a championship?
He is one of those crazy guys that loves it here. I mean, he
Okay.
has got a girlfriend here. He loves being here. He talked about I've talked to him about it before. He talks about how he loves the nightlife and he loves the vibes around OKC. He wants to
Stop it.
I'm dead serious. And it is weird to me as a lifelong OKC guy. It doesn't make any sense to me, but he wants to stay.
Okay.
So I think that he will. I think that he will be here. He's also. I think that he's kind of one of the like organizational guys that they'll keep. Kind of like they kept Nick Collison through the last rebuild. I think they want to keep, one or two of these guys through the duration that they feel like fit the culture.
Yeah. And then the other guy I would put in that category is Kenny Hustle. Like he's not a starter, but he's a good NBA role player who could like help a good team. He's still signed for another year, I think. He's on a great contract. I suspect they'll keep him through this trade deadline. He's already said he doesn't want to go anywhere. So, could something happen with him, in the offseason or next year, maybe? Sure. But I think he probably stays around now. And then you get into these younger players and, they're putting these guys out there. They're giving them some run. And, it's not great right now, if we're being honest. But we're at least seeing some signs, I guess. I could say on a positive note, like Trey Mann has definitely started to play a little better, I think, the last couple weeks.
Sure.
Aaron Wiggins has come on a little bit. I don't think his ceiling is like crazy high or anything, but could he be another role playing wing? I mean, teams are always looking for that. JRE, we'll see. Again, I mean, he's 21, Baisley's 21, Mann's 20. The two guys I think that you really have to worry about are Poku and Maladon. Poku is really falling out of the mix. I mean, the idea was that you were working with Raw Clay here. Let's put him in games, get him reps, see if he improves and whatever. The problem this year is that he hasn't gotten any better. Like even his G League games have been kind of like a little disastrous. And then Maladon really surprised me because I saw him overseas and I thought he could be like a halfway decent NBA player. I want to say I had him like 20th on my board. And then he looked like it in preseason last year, if you remember.
Yeah.
And then the game started and like, whoa, like what happened here? And it just hasn't gotten any better. And I think those two guys are, even on a young rebuilding team, are like kind of on the outside looking in right now. So, and if you can't get minutes on this team, you can't get minutes. Exactly. So I think that's a little concerning. And then, I didn't really talk about Baisley, who's kind of, I don't know. I don't know if he's ever going to be good enough offensively. I guess would be the biggest concern there.
Yeah. I agree. He's too inconsistent. He'll have games, and he needs to understand who he is in the NBA at the end of the day. Like he's just got to take easy shots, and he tries to do some offensive creation stuff that he just can't do. Thoughts on Josh Giddy's season?
I would say pretty encouraging given his age and coming from a league where the competition level, especially in terms of the athleticism, just isn't anywhere near the NBA. So major step up in quality of competition, and he's dealt with it. I mean, he is an NBA caliber playmaker without a doubt. Now he can't shoot a lick right now. And that's the thing that has to change for him to have real plus value as an offensive player, but he rebounds. He's pretty upright, and he looks like he'd just be totally cookable defensively. He's not great, but he's not toast either. Like he's been halfway decent there. And, I give Mark Daigneault credit. Is that even how you say it?
Yeah. Daigneault. Yeah, you're right.
Daigneault. Okay. All right. What I try to do is just kind of mumble the second syllable and just kind of.
Well, the Thunder broadcast doesn't even know how to say. They call him Mark Diagonal all the time.
Diagonal. I give him credit for this team being 14th in defense because there's no logical reason for them to rank that highly on the defensive end with the youth and what's there. So give him credit for that. And I think, I mean, Giddy to me has he hasn't been a liability on that end to me. Like he's probably never going to be great on that end, but I don't think he's like some glaring negative either. And this is with him at 19. I think as he fills out, he'll probably be able to play more 4 too, and then he can create more problems. I think at the other end with his ball handling and off the dribble game and whatnot. And you're hoping the shot comes around like with everyone.
Yeah, and then with Shea, what are your thoughts on like what his ceiling can be as far as when the Thunder are competitive? Like, what does his role look like in your mind?
So he's probably the second best player on a really good team.
Mm-hmm.
If he's your best player, you need a really strong supporting cast, I think, to be really good. I think can he play in multiple All-Star games? Definitely. Can he be a top 10 player in the league? I don't really see that, I guess. I don't think he's quite, athletic enough, bursty enough or whatever, to really get to that point. We're seeing him strain, I think, under the load of having to be the team's entire offense or 90% of it. And so getting more shot creation help there and more shooting, I think would make a big difference. I mean, the two forwards both shoot 26%, the shooting guard who's taking all the threes is shooting 32. Yeah. Shea's shooting 28. I don't think he's that bad a shooter. I just think he has to take a lot of hand grenades, a lot of off the dribble. And again, his shooting motion is like he kind of is better with time and space to me. I mean, it's a low motion. And so when he has to heave, I mean, sometimes I guess like he made that shot at the end of the New Orleans game before Devontae Graham made his 90-footer or whatever. But for the most part, forcing him into those kind of shots is really going to be a drag on his percentages. And I think we're seeing that this year.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned the shooting guard that takes all the threes, Lou Dort. The Thunder are kind of in an interesting place with him. He will be extension eligible in March and then could become a restricted free agent this summer if they chose that for him. I'm just curious what you think a reasonable contract for him would be, and if maybe they determine that he's not a good fit with this team because he doesn't seem to be the best fit with Shea and with Josh Giddy. What would his value be as a trade asset?
That's interesting. Do other teams view him as a starter right now, like on a good team? I wonder that.
Probably situational. I mean, I'm sure some teams could probably squeeze him into their starting lineup as like the fifth guy, but I'm sure there's teams that couldn't.
Yeah, and it would depend on fit a little bit. And if they kind of need that brick wall defensive stopper, like I think he'd be good like in Brooklyn.
Yeah.
Where you could just ask him to shoot really wide open threes and have him guard the other team's best player, which nobody else there has any interest in doing. So I could see that one. Now Brooklyn doesn't have any draft picks to trade until like we're both 90 years old. So so
Sam likes those though. Like he likes
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
He's scheming his 2034 pick right now.
He needs some 2000.
He might have already promised the guy.
That's totally possible. What do you think about a contract for him? Because if the Thunder do keep him, I mean he fits well organizationally. Yeah. They really like him. it's kind of nice that they brought him in as an undrafted guy. He got like a crazy low deal on his second contract. Yeah. Now he's up for, I think he can extend for up to like 12 million a year in March.
Yeah.
That feels like a deal that makes sense for both, but I don't know if he would want more or would even deserve more.
Yeah, that's kind of what I had in my head was like the Dylan Brooks, Josh Richardson special there, where they go out the 3 years. Now I think you're right. It's weird. He's extension eligible in March because he signed coming off his two-way while he was still on the team, right? Yes. But I think they would probably do it in the summer so they could put the extra year on it because he could extend for 2 in March, right? And then 3 in the summer. So I would think they would kick that to the summer and do an extension for 3. That to me would seem to make the most sense. And then you have him under contract till he's 26. And I think even, 12 and under, I mean, I think he's still a trade asset is if he continues on anything close to this trajectory. So it's not anything they really have to worry about. And then honestly, as as this team develops and they might want to make more deals or whatever, you kind of need a few middle-class contracts. Like you can't just be like all minimums and dead money guys. So, so I think there's a little bit of incentive to do something from that perspective too.
Yeah. It's kind of funny. We compared the Thunder to Boston earlier, and he's like going to get like a Marcus Smart contract, and he's going to be kind of their Marcus Smart guy. It's just kind of weird parallels there between those two teams. Thoughts on maybe a team that could dump a salary on the Thunder at the trade deadline? Are there any teams that you see as being desperate that may want to get rid of a deal and give a pick to the Thunder?
I can see a lot of teams that would want to do cash. I'm trying to think who would want to do it, but like Portland and Boston are going to get under the tax, right?
Yeah.
But they're close enough that they could probably do it just by like offloading cash and a minimum guy. And I think Sam is fishing probably for something more than that with his with all this space he has.
Yeah.
And he should. I mean, he's so far below the floor that he should be trying to take something bigger. Philadelphia, obviously they're depending on what happens with Simmons and their contracts, like they could do a Simmons deal where they get multiple players back and one of them is offloaded to Oklahoma City along with a pick. Like I could definitely see something like that happening. There's a couple other teams that I think might end up in a similar position where if they do a trade, like they can't even roster the guys they get. And they don't necessarily want them. So it's just like, here, Sam, you take them, and they drop cash on them that way. I could definitely see the Clippers doing something with Serge Ibaka or Eric Bledsoe. They don't have many draft picks to trade is the problem.
The Thunder have all of them. Yeah.
Yeah. The Thunder already have them. So it's like, oh, what are we going to do here? Similar situation. I think that the Lakers aren't as deep into the tax and they don't really have as much spare money lying around, but we'll see what happens there. Golden State, obviously, and Brooklyn are way into the tax.
Yeah.
But who are their true dead money guys? Like Golden State is so far deep because they're paying 4 guys an insane amount and they're paying James Wiseman $10 million. Well, those 4 guys aren't getting moved by Golden State. And most of the rest of their team is actually cheap guys. Brooklyn, it's a little similar where they're so top heavy with their payroll. It's like, who are they really paying Oklahoma City to take? Again, like we're dealing with minimum guys. So the market probably isn't set up super favorably for the Thunder to take on a bunch of money, unless we're talking about money that goes into next year.
Sure.
Which next year's money gets a little trickier for the Thunder because they, their own cap number jumps up 20 million or whatever. They're hoping to have high draft picks who have high cap holds as well. Like the luxury tax could get in play pretty quickly next year, as odd as it sounds, depending on, if they took on another contract at this trade deadline. So that gets a little weird too. And then the other thing for the Thunder is that it's almost free money right now if they take a contract in, because they have to pay this money to the players anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
So I could see them maybe get into the game late if they don't have anything else to take on some of these minimums from Boston or Portland or whatever, just because it still doesn't really do anything to them to do that. So they'd have to cut somebody, obviously, but I think this roster doesn't lack for candidates.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's probably true. I want to take it back to your Grizzlies days. Did you have much interaction with the Thunder?
Yes, although, so for most of that time period, we were both good, which made us not natural trade partners.
Sure.
So there'd be like perfunctory trade calls, but not a lot got accomplished. Toward the end, when we started moving toward a more rebuilding posture, there was a little more action. It was funny because like Winger was the guy I ended up talking to mostly, who's obviously not there anymore. So, but the perspective, the kind of picture I had of the organization as a whole was that they were, I guess, really methodical.
Yeah.
And really tried to gather as much information as they could, which every team does that to an extent. But I thought Oklahoma City was maybe a little more systematic and a little earlier with it than some other teams.
Yeah.
But didn't really get a great perspective on how they were as far as engineering trade. I guess we did the one trade with them where they were like a third party almost. We did the Courtney Lee trade was like, as this side note to it, we effectively sold a draft pick to Oklahoma City.
Yeah.
And Ryan Gomes was involved somehow. I don't even remember how. But
yeah, I remember that.
Yep. But that's about it.
Yeah. And then was there like a perception of them besides like being methodical, like around the league when it came to dealing with them?
I'm trying to think. Not especially. Like it was, it felt a little hard to get information about like what they were really looking for, which is kind of how San Antonio operated too.
Mm-hmm.
And, there are two perspectives on that, because like when we would deal with the Rockets, for instance, they'd always let you know what they were trying to do, because they felt like maybe this team can help us do that. And has something on the table that they can see that we can't see, because we're not talking to this third team about this particular trade. So, and I always felt that way too, that like giving teams some idea of what we were up to or what we were looking for was the only way to help move the conversation along.
Yeah.
So I guess differing perspectives on that one.
Sure. John, thanks so much for your time, man. Be sure to go read John on The Athletic. Go listen to the Hollinger and Duncan podcasts, one of the smartest podcasts out there. John, we appreciate it, man.
All right. Thanks for having me on the show.